Hey everyone, welcome to the Humans and Wildlife Show. So this week, with me as always is my co-host Christian Sase. Hi, Christian.
Hi, Georgia. Nice to see you. What have we got this week?
Yeah, so this week we're talking about a little bit of a morose topic. We're talking about animal extinctions, and specifically the highlighted one of the highlighted animals is Haast's eagle, which was this huge eagle that went extinct thousands of years ago now. But first, a little bit before we get to the eagle, a little bit about like what inspired this topic. Um, in the United States, this past summer, our government announced here are a list of species that are no longer with us. So yeah, if we could bring up, yeah. So here's the table. Um, I think it's 22 or 23 species. I forget now. 23 species that our government was like, look, we're removing these species from the endangered species list. Not because they've recovered and they don't need our protection anymore, but because no one's seen them for so long that they're extinct. We're not going to try protecting them anymore because we don't think they exist anymore. So clearly, extinction is something that's humans are driving extinction of other animals, and it's happening at a faster and faster rate. And so I thought we're going to revisit this list at the end of the live stream. But first, let's go back in time to sort of earlier in our documented history with humans on animal extinctions. And so Christian is going to um, dive into the example of Haast's eagle, one of the first animals that's like pretty well documented about how we made them go extinct.
Thank you very much, Georgia. This is so exciting this weekend. By the way, thank you, everyone. I'm just looking at YouTube. Someone said, Susan's asking, was it prehistoric? The sound you just heard was a replica of what one believes. This is amazing what they do nowadays in biology. They do so much computer science too. They try and replicate the sound of this Haast eagle. Yes, it is prehistoric. We're going to go into details now. I'm going to jump in straight away and just let me just jump into the correct folder here. Now, before we go there, we just have to imagine a little bit about what it was like many years ago in New Zealand. Okay, so imagine the island of New Zealand hundreds of years ago. We're going back maybe 6, 7, 800 years. It was completely isolated, maybe that's what one believes, for 80 million years. So this is, of course, incredible for anybody who's interested in biology and the origins. Imagine the first settlers coming onto the island and seeing these gigantic ostriches. They were called moas, right? And if you look here at the skeleton, that's what they encountered. You see that on the left, that's the size of an ostrich. If you've ever stood next to an ostrich, you'll see they're quite formidable. I've stood in South Africa many times next to an ostrich, and they're very good watchdogs. They're not dangerous or so, but I wouldn't get too close to an ostrich. But they were these incredibly large, they must have come across there, and completely isolated evolution there of these huge moas. And you have to imagine they were about 3 meters, 3.5 meters tall. That's about, what's that, 12 feet or so. That's huge. I'm 6.5 feet, so that's about almost double my size. Can you imagine that? And what's incredible is the vegetation there must have been incredibly interesting, because in the north of New Zealand, it was more just like a very wet vegetation, foresty, and in the south, of course, a little bit drier. But they believe that there must have been several hundreds or even thousands of these animals. What is interesting is that the eggs were quite huge, and of course, they were as heavy as a big human being, 200 pounds or so, right? But their breeding habits, of course, were very different because they were completely isolated. You have to imagine, and you'll understand in a moment why I'm talking about the moa before we talk about the eagle, is because they only, they laid very few eggs, of course, and it took a long time, right? These huge eggs. And as you can imagine, if when the first human beings came there, uh, no, that's New Zealand. It's all. I'm talking only about New Zealand. This is really isolated New Zealand. That's what we're talking. Maybe about the Stewart Islands, but it's really the isolation. They were only in New Zealand. There must have been about, I don't know, 12, 13 species. It's not, the exact number is not known. But within about 150 years, they went extinct. And nowadays, one knows very well from looking at the DNA sequence that there was no such thing as bottlenecked. Uh, it wasn't a reason of being bottlenecked, which means that because of environmental conditions, they slowly died out. The variation of DNA that they found in the species were huge. So the conclusion is that must have been caused by human beings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on,
So
Georgia.
if I could, yeah, if I
Yeah,
could summarize this
of
far,
course.
because I know that you've been doing a lot of research on this, and you are very excited to share the story of the moas and the Haast eagles with us. So if I could summarize real quick.
Go.
So these giant Haast eagles, which we'll show you in a moment, they ate these giant walking birds, the moas. This was like their food source, I'm assuming. But we have this sort of ecosystem that's on an island. They're on islands, right? This is a very small, like closed system. You might
Exactly.
even say they're a bit naive, right? These animals haven't been exposed
Exactly.
to
That's well
people
said.
before. They're like, it's like you take, a person who's like, has just lived in this small rural countryside, and then you put them in the middle of a city. They're like, whoa, what's going on? So there's like quote unquote sort of naive animals on an island. And then people are building boats, learning how to construct better boats and exploring, and people eventually get to the islands. And you were talking a lot about their eggs, which I'm assuming that people also liked these eggs or something. They're like, oh, look at these. We can make a giant omelet with this or whatever. Um,
That's
so
exactly
yeah,
right. That's exactly it. That's
yeah,
exactly it. Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So we have like a small, delicate ecosystem with just a couple parts, and then we have suddenly people. And sometimes what can happen on islands is that there's very few individuals of the animal species, and so they start to suffer from genetic inbreeding, depression, and stuff like that. But what you're
Exactly.
saying is that doesn't seem to be the case, actually. It looks like, based on the genetics, like before people came, these were like healthy breeding populations of moas on the islands.
Exactly. And by the way, hi every. Oh yeah, Georgia already. She's so good. She welcomed everyone on Facebook too. Thank you, Georgia. You're so good, doing all these things on the sideline and giving a beautiful summary. Exactly. Really very succinct summary. Thank you so much. That's exactly the environment. And of course, these big moas, as you must can imagine, they were completely oblivious to any threat. And because they were so isolated, when the humans came in, I mean, you have to think also of the human beings, right? They were just wanting to survive, right? That was their plan. There wasn't, the word extinction didn't exist at that time. They didn't even know what it was. So they just saw it as a food source. And well, one day it ran out. So why was I talking about the moa so much? Well, I just wanted to show you, if you've ever been to Australia, have you ever seen what a cassowary looks like? Oh my goodness. That's it's a bit smaller than the normal ostrich, but it's quite formidable. They are known to be, these cassowaries have, well, they definitely have these dinosaur-like behaviors indeed, and they have this incredible kick which you don't want to be kicked by them because they are very fast and they can really wound you, although these things are always exaggerated. Of course, there's only been one reported death as far as I know from a cassowary, and that was because it was hunted. Other than that, it never happened. So again, one has to be careful when one says they are dangerous. Yes, they are dangerous, but just leave them alone and they're fine, right? Like many animals are. But if you've seen, a cassowary, then very much fruit eating, um, uh, a non-flying bird, and you now imagine this to be a lot taller than you can imagine what a moa looked like. And now comes the question: why are we talking about these moas? Well, I certainly wouldn't. I mean, if unless you have a spear or so, you wouldn't have gone near them because, I mean, just look at the size. I mean, this is how one imagines them to be, right? So it's
Yeah,
yeah,
and to be clear, there was not just one species of moa, but about 11 species, we think now, on these
exactly.
different islands. But they were all much bigger than people, or almost all.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They were much bigger than people, and that's probably what they looked like, right? That's
I
probably
love this.
the I mean that's amazing, isn't it? So yeah, and now we come to that, and now we come to the main part of of the story. Why are we talking about them? And we're now getting into this enormous eagle, and that's really fascinating because I mean you've seen us talk about bald eagles and so on. I forgot the size comparison here, but now imagine a bald eagle, a female bald eagle is typically about, I'm just going to give you the, what one believes they looked like, right? Wait a second. Let's see. Yeah. Now this nobody knows exactly what they looked like, but this is about double the size of a bald eagle. A female bald eagle weighs about 15 pounds, which is about 7 kilos. These weighed the females 15 to 17 kilos. Can you believe it? A wingspan of a bald eagle is typically about 6 foot. They had a wingspan of about possibly, let's see, yeah, possibly 10, 12, 10 feet or so, not more. So one believes actually that they were very much adapted to the local circumstances and the climates. They were forest hunters. Okay, so they didn't just look like a big eagle with bigger wings. They came off from the vultures originally, and so they were in a way a mixture probably between a vulture and an eagle with all the, equipped with everything, more gliders. They would perch very high and then they would glide down very efficiently. And they had claws of the size of a tiger. Can you imagine that? Or I should say talons of the size of a tiger. Nobody knows what their plumage exactly looked like. But they were able to attack these moas, can you believe it? And pierce right through their skin and kill them, and probably one believes this, crush their skull with their incredible talons. They would be able to crush the skull, kill it very quickly, and feed off them for many days. And that's how they survived.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems. By the way, did you have any pictures of like the Haast's eagle with like a human or something like
I'm
that? Because they really are like huge compared to
right.
to people. I actually at a museum years and years ago, they had a
You saw
skeleton
it,
of
right?
one hanging, and yeah, and it was like bigger. I mean, I'm sure it was a cast of the skeleton or whatever. But I was like, I mean, I was a kid, but I was like, that thing is bigger, like way bigger than I am. And it was insane for me to imagine like an eagle being so big.
It is,
Um,
and whilst you'll talk, Georgia, I in
mhm.
all my excitement, I forgot that main thing because I thought, well, that's silly, I'm going to show a size comparison, but you're right. By the way, it's not the largest bird that ever lived. We'll talk about that another time. It's,
Oh, yep. There's our next topic
that's
for a
our next
future
topic.
session.
Yeah.
I'm writing it down right now in my ideas notebook. Actually, here it goes.
But
Um,
but but there is, of course, from the Maori culture there's a lot of mythology, and some of them, and typically you would see this on YouTube from people who are very sensationalist, that there would be fights between people and the eagles would attack people. I personally think that's highly unlikely because they're first of all, there wouldn't be a reason why they would suddenly attack people. It's more likely that they just ran out of moas because they were killed, and then possibly because the breeding habit of these Haast eagles was such that they would only have one egg possibly per year or even per two
mhm.
years. That's, can you believe, only one egg? And then it would take quite a long time for them to grow up, and
Yeah.
that also explains why they would go extinct so quickly.
Yeah, and Christian, do you want to show us some of these other pictures? Are these also Haast's eagles here,
Yes,
or
that's a replica there. I mean, you can see these
okay?
huge talons. They're absolutely huge. Let's see. It's very difficult to. Well, this is of course,
Oh,
it's very artistic. You can't
mhm.
really see the size from them, but this is the skull. I mean that's definitely real. Okay,
Yeah,
That's the skull, and you can get the size from that. That is huge. I mean that's makes a bald eagle look like a crow next to it almost. Well, not that's I'm exaggerating a bit, but yeah. It's quite incredible. I will try in the meantime, Georgia, when you start
mhm.
talking, I'll try and find some size comparison. I've had them, but at the moment
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't. But
Oh yeah, that's fine. I was just curious if you happen to have one. I mean, I like the one. Go back to the one you just were on it with the moa in the front
oh,
and
this one
the
here.
Haas
You mean this
eagle
one?
in the back. Um,
I know which one you mean. Wait a
oh
second.
yeah, it's like an artistic rendition of it
This one,
hunting
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
moa
This one,
or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
No, not there
Not
was
that one.
one where there was just like the moa is like with that one. Yeah. I
That one.
liked yeah, I liked Mohammed's comment on Facebook, an
Okay.
avian giraffe. That's what they look like. They do look like giraffe birds, the moas do.
And if you
Yeah,
listen
I
to
mean,
the sorry, if you listen to the beginning of
mhm.
the broadcast, if you listen to the sound or the emulation, what one believes the sound to be like, it's quite incredible. That's very likely what it sounded like, right? So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Um, I am, let me think. So, and to be clear, so this is, an early documented case of people arriving at an island. Oh, we start eating eggs or moas or whatever. And then we have the extinction of moas and Haast's eagles, which relied on the moas to eat them. And this was back in the 1300, 1400s,
That's
correct? That
right.
these
That's correct.
extinctions were happening?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to, do you think, are we ready to jump ahead in time
Yes.
to our next
Let's jump.
extinction?
Let's
Okay.
jump to the next one. So that is
Yeah.
now we're going to. Where do you want to go to, Georgia?
Let's talk about the thylacines. And, well, actually,
The
do you know
Tasmanian
what?
tiger. Yeah.
Let's talk about the passenger pigeon. That's the
Oh yeah,
next
yeah, yeah, yeah. You got it.
chronological one.
The
And so I
passenger
think
pigeon.
there
Yes,
was
there
a
you go. Yeah.
few, yeah, not to mislead us, and we can talk about it very quickly.
Okay.
Um, And so this is like a species of bird it was a type of pigeon in North America, and they were very, very common. Is it possible to zoom on the picture a
Yes, of
little bit or
course it is.
no?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
we can. Yes.
But so these were pigeons that were so common that they were described as the flocks would darken the sky. It was like clouds
Wow.
passing in front of the sun. So this is an artistic representation. And these pigeons were very, very widely hunted, at least in the United States. And so, if I think there's a picture of someone standing in front of like a pile, what looks like a little pile of dead stuff. It's an old
Okay, one second.
photograph.
1 second. I will just
Yeah,
try
go for it.
this one. Oh my goodness, this one. Yes.
I can't. Oh, I'm on the wrong. Yes, that one. Yeah. So zoom in. So a lot of people, you look at this and you can't quite tell what it is in the
Wow.
photo. People are like, "Oh, is it buffalo skull?" So I think some places on the internet it's even misattributed to a pile of buffalo skulls, but no, this is actually a pile of dead passenger pigeons. So you can see that people were really hunting these pigeons to a really high degree and just killing like tons and tons of them. And it was one of those things. There were so many pigeons. People thought that like never in a million years did they think that they would go extinct. But guess what? They did end up going extinct. And so I think, let me look.
So what was the?
Um,
Do you know, Georgia, what the
mhm.
reason was? Why this type of pigeon and not others? What? I'm just curious. I didn't read about this, so I don't know. So, do you have
Yeah,
any
and so
idea?
to some degree, like we still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But part of um, part of what they think is that because this species was adapted to basically existing in huge numbers, that once their population started to decline, they just weren't well adapted. Like we actually had an episode on social aggregations in birds and other animals,
Hmm.
right? We had a couple episodes on it and how being in a big group can protect you from predators.
Right.
So it could be that these birds, for example, like were clumsy flyers or something, and they really relied on like being part of a massive group in order to survive. And so once their population started declining, they really quickly just plummeted because when they were fewer of them, it was just so easy for other predators like hawks or whatever to pick them off. Um, but there is a silver lining to this. And so to be clear, this was in like the early 1900s, I think
Right.
maybe 1900. By 1900, it was clear in the United States that that this was going to be an extinct species, and this actually led to the Lacey Act, which later became our
Okay.
Endangered Species Act. But it was basically the first time that there was federal legislation in the United States for protecting a wild animal. So there's a silver lining here, right? That the passenger
Right.
pigeons did go extinct, but people saw what they
Hmm.
did and were like, "Oh my goodness, we actually this is something we need to keep an eye on and to regulate." And so the United States in 1900, which sort of influenced by the obvious like oncoming extinction of the passenger pigeon,
Right.
Congress passed the Lacey Act, which allowed states. It gave states more power to potentially protect resident species within the state. For example, it allowed them to make it unlawful to transport illegally taken wildlife across state lines and stuff like that.
Yes.
And this later like morphed into our federal Endangered Species Act. It paved the way for it.
Interesting.
Um,
Good.
yeah, so but let's jump to the thylacine because I'm trying
Okay,
to
here
stay
we go.
chronological. Okay, so yeah, the United States passenger pigeon is going extinct 1900. We realize it's a problem.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, in Australia, they've been dealing with another species that's on its way to extinction. And so this is a mammal called the thylacine,
Or the
also
Tasmanian
called
tiger, right? Yeah.
yeah, also
Hmm.
called the Tasmanian tiger.
Hmm.
Exactly, yeah. And as you can see in the upper left picture
Marsupial.
there, this it was actually a
Yeah,
marsupial.
it's
Yeah,
incredible. Huh?
they had a pouch like a kangaroo. Um, and so it's kind of interesting. Yeah, you can kind of see like the little animals peeking out the back of it there.
That's
But
incredible.
yeah, why don't we look at because we have some footage of them as well. So we're
Okay.
getting to be like recent enough that we actually have video
Yeah,
footage
footage. Yeah, we
of
do. We do. 1 second. Let me just jump to it,
yeah.
Georgia. I will.
Yeah, take your time.
Here we are. That's here. Let's just jump to
Yeah. And
this.
so
And
this footage is from a thylacine or Tasmanian tiger that was in captivity. The last sort of known ones died in captivity. And it's been artificially colored. But we can just see it sort of like a big dog, basically, moved like a dog, acted like a dog. Um,
yeah, you know what's
and
interesting?
yeah,
Yeah.
we,
Sorry.
oh,
Go on.
go. No, I was
No,
just going to comment on
yeah. Go
this.
on. Go on.
We have a comment from Bonnie Plumer
Hmm.
from that says, could it also be that the pigeons ate crop settlers were growing? And that could be part of it. It could be that could certainly be part of why people hated the passenger pigeons. We actually have a similar case with the Tasmanian tiger here. People had livestock, and the Tasmanian tigers ate some of the livestock, and so people really demonized them and were really upset with them for eating their livestock.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so there's a few different things that ultimately led to the thylacine's demise. So in 1936 is when the last known thylacine died. The factors that contributed to this extinction were probably hunting, introduced disease, habitat destruction, and introduction of the dingo, a non-native species that
Okay.
competed with the thylacine for resources and stuff. Um, so, as I think I mentioned, the thylacine was in mainland Australia and Tasmania
Yes. Yes.
in the early eight.
That answers Janet's question. She's asking exactly that question.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah, and I think they were only in Australia.
Hmm.
Yeah, um, But in the early 1800s, that's when we start to see European settlements coming in, and they brought, livestock with them. And then when their livestock were killed by the Thylacine, that starts the problematic relationship, right? And so, from what I've read, a lot of the livestock deaths, most of them were actually probably from feral, free roaming dogs, like domestic dogs. Um, but it was easy to sort of demonize the Thylacine. And in order to sort of help with this livestock problem, the Australian government actually started a bounty. So people would get paid for bringing in dead thylacines. You would get paid a lot for an adult and a little bit
Hmm.
less for pups. But we talked about this in a previous episode, Christian. We had a bounty on an episode about
Eagles, yeah.
bounty on bald eagles.
That's
Yeah, the
right.
United States. Yeah, we had a bounty on bald eagles because they were interfering with our fishing industry, supposedly. So the Australian government did something similar with thylacines. Um, the last place in Australia that they ended up being more in the wild was on the island of Tasmania in the
Right.
southeast of Australia. And so they were sort of driven out of the rest of mainland Australia, I think by like collectively like dingoes and this bounty and stuff. But they held on Tasmania for a little bit longer. Um, yeah,
That
so
that's that's very
that,
that's very
yeah.
interesting, Georgia. That's because let me just go back to your page 1 second. Just put up some pictures so we can talk about this a little bit more. Let's take this one here and just. So what is interesting is I've actually looked a little bit of what's on social media now about the Tasmanian tiger, and it's what I found interesting. There was a talk from the University of Melbourne just a month ago. The question was, can we replicate the DNA of and can we make another Tasmanian tiger to reintroduce it, for the extinction that we human beings have introduced. It's a big topic actually. It's very complex, and they believe that probably in 10 years they'll be far enough to do that. I found that absolutely fascinating. It's much more complex than what we see in Jurassic Park, obviously. Maybe, Georgia, one day you'll find somebody who can talk about this topic. It would be fascinating because there's so much going on. But
I think it would be a super exciting topic to
mhm.
explore. Oh, and I think somewhere there's a picture of someone like a hunter with a thylacine too. If
Yes,
you can find it, that's
yes,
our
I
last
can.
thylacine
I
picture.
know. I know
Um,
where it is.
yeah, but the question, I mean, that the question when it comes to like resurrecting species
Mhm.
based on their DNA, the question kind of becomes, well, all of these species we're talking about, at least all of the more recent
Mhm.
ones, excluding the eagle and the moa, um, we knew that they were going extinct and we tried to save them when we had probably dozens of individuals left in the wild, if not more. And so even if we used genetics to bring back to life, like even 100 individuals of some of these species, they wouldn't be able to live in the wild, right? We destroyed their habitat. There's invasive
Exactly.
species. They can't compete with genetic diversity. As you alluded to earlier, Christian, genetic diversity is really important for preventing inbreeding and stuff. So if we just have like 20 clones of one species, they're still not going to survive very long. Um,
You are
and I
so
think,
yeah, you're so
yeah.
right. I just wanted to add in that I read exactly that on MOAs because there was a big discussion in actually going on in New Zealand where some politicians said, if we could only clone properly or if we could do the DNA sequence correctly, we could reintroduce them. And actually, that was disproved by biologists because they said that the environment doesn't exist. You can't do that. They won't
Yeah.
survive. It's not so simple.
Yeah, and like I mean, the other thing is like conservation money is very limited, right? So we are struggling with very limited money to protect the species that we do have that exist. And so taking like a big chunk of that money away and putting it towards cloning animals that are probably not gonna, they're probably just gonna go extinct again soon anyways. It's like at some point we could better use that money towards maybe preventing extinctions. The
Yes.
money would go farther for the buck. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of the wonderful concluding discussion we had with Maya when we asked her what would a big thing be in her life? And then she said to save one species. And I think that was a marvelous answer. I just had to remember that. So
Oh yeah, she
yeah,
said to contribute
yeah,
meaningfully towards saving
yeah,
5 species, right?
yeah.
I
Oh
so
wow, yeah,
actually she's more
yeah,
ambitious than that. Yeah.
yeah.
That was our last interview
I
in
loved that
last week.
comment.
Yeah.
Really, that was incredible. So yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. I just saw a comment. Hi, Amanda. I just saw she was talking about the ivory-billed woodpecker. Do you know anything about that? I don't know anything about it, but Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, so we are actually right on track. So that
Okay.
was one of the 23 species
Okay, so here's an
listed
ordinary
on
one.
that table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's an
Um,
ordinary one. Yes. Okay.
oh, yeah, I have a picture of an ordinary
Yeah.
one.
Sure.
And so this is many people you'll see them say like I saw an ivory-billed woodpecker, and really they saw this the pileated woodpecker, which is also a very large species of woodpecker, not quite as big, but not an ivory-billed. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think there's even a short documentary you can find about
Mm-hmm.
like a decade ago or so. There was a big kerfuffle where people were like, "Oh, we think we saw the ivory-billed
Is
woodpecker
that
in
right?
Alabama." Yeah, but and you look in the documentary and there's
Mm-hmm.
people in it that are like, I think one woman, she says something like, well, I don't think this ivory-billed woodpecker is extinct because the mailman said he saw one last week, like on the telephone pole. And she was like, and she said something like, you got to trust the mailman.
Of
And
course.
I agree. You should trust your mail person. But that being said, it's tempting to think that some of these species are alive. And even the Tasmanian tiger that we were just talking about, there's still people show footage and they're like, oh, we think we saw a Tasmanian tiger. They're still out there. It would be wonderful if that were the case. And maybe for a couple of these, it is. But we usually wait quite a long time before declaring something as extinct. And so, despite tons and tons of money, and in fact, this was a bit of a kerfuffle in the United States. It's often seen as mismanagement of conservation funding.
Right.
Someone thought they saw an ivory-billed woodpecker in Alabama, and the
Uh-huh.
government spent, I don't even know how much money, like obscene amounts of money, going out and looking for this thing. Here's some footage of them.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Um,
Yes.
yeah, and we didn't find it, right? And it's been, I wish I had off the top of my head. Actually, I think in that table, if I go to it, I'm just glancing at my
Okay.
notes. Um, the ivory-billed woodpecker was last seen in 1944, is the last confirmed sighting. Um, it was added to the endangered species list in the United States in
Okay.
1967. So about 20 years later, that tells you something about the pace of
Yeah, sure.
conservation policy. 20 years after the last known sighting, it's finally added to the endangered species list. But no one, we haven't had a confirmed sighting in a long, long time. And a big part of the story for ivory-billed
Mm-hmm.
woodpeckers going extinct is
Mm-hmm.
habitat loss. So they
Okay.
live
Okay.
in like swampy
Mm-hmm.
areas in like the hot, humid
Mm-hmm.
southeastern United States, and people don't like swamps. We drain swamps. You want to use, people often
Mosquitoes,
want to use that
whatever.
land for
Yeah.
agriculture.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to get rid of the
Mm-hmm.
mosquitoes. You want to be able to build houses there. You basically want anything
Mm-hmm.
but for it to be a swamp. So a big part of the story for the ivory-billed extinction is habitat loss. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Wow.
And I don't
Oh.
know. I'm just gonna go look on the comments
Mm-hmm.
because as it is such a popular species. Yeah, and so people too tend to follow it and have questions and stuff. Um, oh wow, we have a comment from Karen. They cloned a frozen black-footed ferret, which will add a third line to the genetic pool. So
Really?
black-footed ferrets are an endangered
Mm-hmm.
species in the US. I don't know if they're in Canada too, but they
I
are
don't know.
still around.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. They're in the western U.S.
Mm-hmm.
at the very least,
Mm-hmm.
an endangered species. And so I had no idea that cloning was going on to add genetic diversity, but that's really cool to hear about. Yeah. So it's a cool point too because it's not either or, like, oh, we could actually clone to help preserve currently living species and bring back some of the lost genetic diversity, not just clone already extinct species. So yeah, that's
Right.
cool. Um, yeah. So I think, yeah,
Yeah.
we can look at perhaps some of the other
What would you
species
like to do?
from that
Hmm.
list. Yeah. So maybe let's just pop up the list real quick here.
Uh,
The table,
oh, you
just
want to pop
just
the
to
list?
just to
Yes,
look at
of
it. Yeah.
course, of course.
So you can see the ivory-billed woodpecker is on there. It's like the fifth species down, I think. Um, and this is just like a list of the species. It tells you where they're from, what those are abbreviations for the United States, each state or territory, and
By
when
the
it was
way,
listed and when it was last seen.
Diana
Mhm.
just said the Toronto Zoo has made a huge impact on breeding the black-footed ferret. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Oh, that's
Good.
awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to look up. I could do it right now. Someone look up if the black-footed ferrets are also in Canada, or yeah, if the United States, we just like outsourced our conservation breeding to them or something. But that's awesome to hear. Yeah, I know some people that work at the Toronto Zoo, um, not in ferrets and bats, but that's pretty cool to hear. Um, but yeah, so a lot of these species that we're looking at, you'll notice a lot of them are from Hawaii. That's the HI abbreviation. So Hawaii is an island, and this relates to our story at the beginning of
That's
Haast's
right.
eagle and the moas on islands. So species on islands are often vulnerable for going extinct because they're often restricted to an island or small set of islands, and so there's not very many of them. And those island ecosystems are pretty sensitive and isolated. And so once you start doing things like bringing in invasive species, you have the collapse of that system. Um, so we have several birds from Hawaii that have been listed as extinct.
I'm just going to
Um,
read some comments out from some.
yeah, go for it.
Gentleman Girl says, I can imagine the unique species hiding in the Amazon. Well, that's another big topic. Amanda says, I was horrified to hear that after the ivory-billed woodpecker, the largest species of them was already thought extinct, a pair showed up in South Florida. They were killed and collected as specimens. Oh, well, yeah. So,
Yeah, so there's actually, oh, I think there was another video I sent you of some other species of woodpecker that was also declared extinct. Not from the US, though. This was a species from Mexico, but it's not very good footage. We don't have to look at it. But yeah, the ivory-billed woodpecker would have been the third largest species of woodpecker at the time. Um, yeah, so let's look at some of the. Let's just randomly click on some of the other pictures.
of course,
They're
sure.
all pictures. The rest of the pictures that I sent you are all
So, do you
pictures
want me to
from this
start right at
list.
the
Yeah.
top? Tell me what.
No particular order. Yeah,
Okay.
just like if you go back, like all of these are from. Yeah, so this is Bachman's warbler, and let me go ahead and pull up. So Bachman's warbler, it's a small yellow and black songbird, and its habitat was the forests of the southeastern United States, and they also overwintered in Cuba, a little bit farther south. And so they, similar to the ivory-billed woodpecker, relied on wetlands, a lot of wetland habitat, and type and forests that were like logged. So basically, a lot of their habitat was like drained or cut down. Um, this species was last seen in the early 1960s, and 7 years later, it was added to the Endangered Species Act.
Right.
So
Okay.
we can do the next,
Next
a
one, of
different
course.
picture. Yeah.
I don't know what this one was. So here you go.
Yeah, so yeah, just zoom in a little bit. And that is so this is actually a photograph, and I don't know how to pronounce it. It's, well, one common name is the black-faced honey creeper. The, um, the name, there's also a name called the pouli. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I assume like that's, I think, the word like in Maui. And so this is a bird that um, inhabited the wet easternmost side of the island and um, was already very rare by the early 1900s. And so it suffered from habitat loss and disease. And also, this this bird, I guess it specialized in eating these very small species of snails, these tree snails.
Hmm.
Um, and those tree snails are also like species that went extinct, I guess.
And
So this is a bird that was native to Hawaii. Yeah.
I'm getting some inquiries. I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment, Georgia. I'm
Oh, go
going
ahead.
to
Yeah.
do a quick search on the Haast's eagle because people have come late and some just wanted to know what it looks like. So
Oh, yeah. Let's show the Haast eagle
I'm going to
again.
just
Yeah.
quickly Google it because I cannot believe that I forgot the size comparison here, but I will
Yeah.
show them to you because there are some fascinating one. This is probably the size. There you can see. I don't want to go on the YouTube video now, but if you look
Hmm.
here on the right hand side, you can see the size
Yeah.
of this massive eagle. Now that's a stupid picture. I don't know why they sometimes they just this is quite a good one. That's an artist. Wait a minute. Where was the artist? Let me just. Where was it? I just had that artist. Here it was.
Yeah.
Oh, now it disappeared. I don't understand. What? That's strange. Okay, here is a size comparison. Let me just go here. That shows you the wingspan. Here we go. This is where this is. Sorry about that. I'm trying to avoid all these things at the moment. Let me see if I can do this a better way. Just one second.
Yeah. Take your time.
Because I'm going to jump off that computer and jump on my other computer. Just one second. Because it's going to be easier that way. Just give me a second. And go in again with Haast Eagle. Because I've Googled this so many times and get out the images a little bit better. Okay, so
Yeah. And as you're looking, I'm just
mhm.
going to address a
Go
comment
ahead.
from Amanda Price. Yeah. She asked, why wouldn't they have been caught and brought into a zoo? Obviously, she's not talking about the Haast eagle.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah,
She's probably
right.
talking about
Sure.
some of those smaller birds we were talking about before. Um, yeah. So why wouldn't they have been caught and brought into captivity to revitalize their species? Yeah. Um, so a few different answers to that. One is cost. Like it can be
Hmm.
captive breeding programs are very expensive. They're also very high failure rate. So often you bring animals into captivity and then you can't get them to breed or something like that. Like they're so stressed out from being in captivity that they don't end up actually reproducing or doing that well. So unless you already know how to take care of this species in captivity and you already know that it can breed in captivity, it's actually can be quite the gamble to take them out of their natural habitat and hope that they're going to do better in captivity. And then, Amanda, I also suspect that for those birds, I think neither of them were listed until they weren't listed as endangered until after they already hadn't been seen in the wild for a little while. So I think that there was just sort of a lag, either an intentional one or unintentional, where sometimes we don't realize there's a problem until it's too late, especially back then when we didn't have as much, um, like we weren't like keeping as close of an eye on different species. There wasn't as much monitoring in place. And so it was harder to catch things in time before it became too late. Yeah.
This may be probably from its plumage. One doesn't know the plumage exactly, but this seems to be at some airport. I would love to go to that airport one day and see this, but that's a replica of the Haast's eagle. Must be tremendous. You should see it next to a bald eagle. Now I have a bald eagle actually right next to me that a taxidermist did. I don't know if you can. I can't get him completely on from the size, but you sort of get the size of the head. No, I can't. You can't see it here. I have to bring him more in. My friend did a little bit more in there, but he's too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult, but that would completely dwarf a bald eagle. It's just incredible. Anyway, so I hope that helped. Let's go back to your pictures now,
Yeah.
Georgia. Wait a second. Okay, one second. Okay, here we go. Which one would you like now? This one, maybe?
Yeah, let's do that one. They
Okay.
look fairly unassuming. So a lot of these, I didn't pick up like pictures from everything on this list. I just
Okay.
did some of them, but I did. These birds caught my eye because they're not the most flashy or beautiful birds, and I think it highlights kind of what I was just talking about. Like sometimes things that we don't notice are in big trouble and going extinct. So this is called the kama'o, is the name of the bird. Um, and it used to be the most common bird on Kauai. I'm not
Okay.
very good at
Okay.
pronouncing the
That's
island
okay.
names. But it's a type of thrush, and it mostly lived in the forests. And its primary diet was fruit and insects. And by 1928, it had mostly disappeared. Um, by 1980, there were just 24 left, and the last one was seen in 1987. And so then this year, or I should say last year in September, it was finally declared extinct, along with those other 23 animals.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So
Then let's
next,
go on our list. Oh, I don't know why. You got a mussel here?
yeah. So this a mussel is a type of animal, and
Sure.
actually there's several mussels listed on that list of
Oh, I
23
see.
species.
Right.
Yeah. And so
Okay.
actually not a lot of people know this, but the sort of eastern United States is a hotspot for mussel biodiversity in the world. So they have more different species of mussel there than anywhere else. These are freshwater mussels. They live in streams, and they're often very sensitive to water quality. And so water pollution for a lot of these mussel species is a cause for the extinctions or population declines. So this particular species of mussel is called the let's see. This is the green blossom pearly mussel, and it's only ever been seen a handful of times, and it was last seen in well, I guess most of the sightings were before 1918. It was last seen alive in 1982 in Tennessee.
Right. I didn't know. Gosh.
Yeah. And so it was in
Okay.
Tennessee and Virginia in the United States. And so, in addition to pollution from coal mining, the other big factor that contributed to its extinction was people building dams. So this
Okay.
species exclusively lived in like the headwaters, like the tiny streams high up in the mountains where like the stream is just starting. So they lived in headwaters, but as you build dams and then you flood these areas, and then instead of a tiny, fast running stream, you have a big, slow body of water. It's a very different habitat, potentially with, like really big fish and stuff like that in it. So this, along with a bunch of other mussel species, is one of the ones that recently was declared extinct.
And here's another one, by the way. We don't have maybe just.
Oh, did I put another mussel picture
Yeah,
in
you
there?
did
All
actually. It's
everyone
okay.
everyone came for the eagles. I'm like, come for the eagles, and then let me show you these mussels. I think they're quite beautiful, really. I mean, there's
Of
slight
course.
differences in colors in their shell and stuff like that. Oh, good, not another mussel bird. I did try to pick up mostly on the birds. So this is a honey creeper, which is also in Hawaii. This is the Kauai Akiaula. Whoa, I messed that up.
You're
Let
very
me try
brave to
again.
try and pronounce this.
Brave or insulting.
Yes.
The Kauai Akiaula.
Wow.
Akiaula. So this was a short-tailed Hawaiian honey creeper, and it only lived on the island of Kauai.
Really? Okay.
It has, as you can see, this huge, long, curved bill, which was about a third of its body length. So this was the longest bill of any Hawaiian songbird, even like the honey creepers, which are known for their long bills. Um, the last one that we know of was seen in 1965. And the species went extinct because of a disease that was spread by mosquitoes. And if you don't know,
Oh.
mosquitoes are an invasive species that's not native to Hawaii, but which was introduced there
Oh,
by
really?
accident. So,
Oh dear. I didn't know.
yeah. Yeah, I think they thought the mosquitoes came over when they were shipping tires, like
Hmm.
car tires. And if you know anything about tires, you get these like pools of water inside the tire, and that's where like the like mosquito. I think they think that like the mosquito larvae was in that water in the tires, and that's how it came over. How the mosquitoes came over.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we've gone through them. That's just again the passenger pigeon that you've already alluded to. Yeah, maybe we should just see if there are any other additional comments from the audience, anything they would like to know.
Yeah. Here's
And
oh yeah, this image of the passenger pigeon. I think this is a taxidermied model that they like put
all
out
right,
into
yes,
into nature to take a picture of it. Yeah. We have an interesting comment from Diane Peck. She says, I was hired years ago as a scuba diver for
uh-huh.
Pickering nuclear plant to rid the clogged pipes of the invasive zebra mussels. Yeah, so zebra mussels are opposite. In contrast to a species of mussel that's in of conservation concern, zebra mussels are an invasive species.
Hmm.
That's a pest, and yeah, they're a smaller mussel species, and they actually grow on top of native mussel species and contribute to the extinction of native mussels. Yeah. Um, yeah, looking. Yeah, a lot of cool. Looks like a lot of people like this um, episode. Yeah, someone said that the Haast eagle looks kind of like a vulture. Yeah, at the beginning
It's
of the episode,
correct.
Christian, you were talking about how they
Yes.
part of their
Hmm.
behavior, part of their ecology, was similar to
Yes.
vultures. Yeah, where they would kill these giant moa birds,
Yes.
but then it was too much for them to eat
Eat.
in one
That's
day,
it.
so they would spend days eating them, just
Yeah.
like a vulture.
Which is quite incredible. Yeah, it's absolutely correct. I can tell you, I would give anything to go back in time. I've been dreaming of that when I go and take my dogs out. I dream of these things of being suddenly on the island with my camera and being able to film things that you've never seen before. But I'm sure I'm not the only one
Yeah,
who dreams of these things.
yeah. Well, so like I have my closing thoughts are kind of this. Um, I don't know if you can find it, but there was another video of a different
Okay.
species of woodpecker, the imperial woodpecker, that's thought to be extinct. It was one of the links I sent you, but
Oh,
the
did I
footage is
miss it? I must have
maybe.
missed it. Wait a second,
Well,
Georgia. Sorry
you're
about that.
fine. Yeah, regardless, the footage was quite bad, but
Oh,
it
I
made me
found it.
think of you, Christian. Yeah, it made me think of you because I was like, wow, like if only Christian had been there, he would have gotten better footage um, of these
Well,
birds. And so,
and the wonderful thing, Georgia, what I like to do is I like to use my big lens, so I'm completely unevasive of anything, so that I don't have to interfere with things. And I would have loved to do it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
well, it made me think, Christian, have you ever thought about going out there with your camera and trying to film some of these endangered species? Yeah, let's watch this video.
Let's
Let's
watch
watch
this
this.
quickly, and then we'll go into that. I just wanted to because you were talking about this. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, so believe, oh goodness, and I have forgotten information on this, but this
That's
is
okay.
another extinct
Hmm.
species of woodpecker. This footage was from Mexico, I believe,
Hmm.
and it's the
Oops.
imperial woodpecker. Yeah,
Imperial woodpecker.
yeah.
Wow, this is
And so you can,
incredible. Yeah.
yeah, they have a
Wow.
really cool like curl of feathers on their head.
Right.
But yeah, Christian, have you ever thought of going and trying to film species that are going to go extinct soon, probably?
I would need your help even to. I wouldn't even know where to start, Georgia. I think it's a great. It's really a great idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We're
Yeah.
gonna start we're gonna start a crowdfunder for it or something. We're gonna
Yes.
go and hunt. You have to pick something that's not, obviously you have to pick
Hmm.
something that we can find. Because if it hasn't been seen in 30 years, then we're probably not gonna find it or get good footage of it.
Hmm.
But it would be cool to, yeah, find things um, that are, you know, probably not gonna be around but much longer, but which we also know where to find them, something about where to find them.
And gentleman goes
Um,
to ask a very relevant question, by the way. Why, and how would ostriches and emus survive? And are they not endangered at all, as far as I know? Why they survived is of course also Australia is a much larger country, right? It wasn't so sensitive as New Zealand, and again. Georgia would probably tell you that's diversification of species, right? Also, the ostrich wouldn't have many predators. That's another thing, as the only predator in this case would be man, really. It's the same thing why the kangaroo survives so well in Australia.
Yeah, part of it has to do with one of the things that's correlated with species likelihood of going extinction is their range size.
Their
So the
range is
moas were restricted to these smaller islands, and had,
correct.
smaller just naturally by virtue of being on an island, they had smaller populations. There weren't as many of them. It's easier for them to go extinct. Yeah,
Yes, and the
there's
Haast,
also.
yeah, sorry, and just alluding to that, the Haast eagle must have had not like a bald eagle that would have a few miles. They must have had tens, if not hundreds, of square miles of territory because there were quite a few. I mean, there were actually few. That's what I was trying to say. Not so many, and or they must have been spread over large areas of New Zealand. So yeah.
Yeah. And I should mention also there's these birds, they're not quite as big, but called rheas, RHEA, that are also sort of flightless birds
Hmm.
that run around on two legs. And some of those are near threatened. They're in South America, I believe, maybe only South America. But yeah, and I guess my final
Hmm.
concluding comment,
Sure.
Christian, I'll let
Go
you
on.
do yours next, but my final concluding comment is next week we're actually going to be talking about discovery of new species. And we're going to have a guest who has described several new species of grasshopper, but we're going to be talking about discovering other new species as well. And someone commented earlier, I forget who it was, I'm sorry, someone commented, oh, but I bet there's a bunch of undiscovered species in the Amazon rainforest, for example. And
Oh yeah.
you would be correct. Yeah. I mean, and certainly things have probably gone extinct, which we never even knew about or described as species. Um, so, next week we have the flip side of extinction,
Hmm.
species extinction, which is species discovery. Yeah.
And then probably in the subsequent ones, I'll just mention one that we're thinking of is because of this big volcano that you've heard of in Tonga, right? That caused, at least on the geologists, a lot of interest. My son is a geologist, and he told me so much about this, how exciting it is. And one of the exciting things about this volcano, of course, was that it caused tsunamis in another ocean because of a traveling air pressure wave that went around that hadn't been seen anything like that. So the question then is, can animals actually sense earthquakes? That's a good question,
Mhm.
and Georgia and I will look at that probably in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, and I mean, well, I have all kinds of ideas on even just like volcanoes and
Go,
wildlife, right?
go ahead.
Because when like a volcanic eruption happens, it often like wipes out the area around it, including sometimes the entire island, if it's like a island that is basically a volcano. So this is actually a really interesting opportunity to learn, oh, like to look at species
Hmm.
recolonizing an area. What species come first? How do they sort of like pave the way for other animals? So I don't know. Yeah, maybe we'll just have like a whole volcanoes and wildlife episode. That would be fun.
Yeah, and we'll also talk about the biggest bird that ever lived. That's going to be one episode. That interests me no end.
Yeah, we had a question. I think it was on Facebook earlier about if it was the pterodactyl or the pterosaur, and I actually wasn't sure if that was a bird or not. Does it count?
I can't answer that because I just don't know
Yeah.
enough about it.
Oh,
But
okay.
but I will. I read a bit about it because I was reading about the Haast eagle, and then my first question was that the biggest? And I found out no, not at all. But we'll go into that. We'll keep the suspense
Mhm.
going due to my
Yeah,
lack of knowledge. Okay.
yeah. That suggestion of it being a pterodactyl was from Eric Kuhn on
Okay.
Facebook. I just went and looked it up. So thanks everyone for your questions. They inspire our future episodes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you ever have any guest you would like to bring on board, let us know. Or any topic. The problem, I'll tell you a little bit, because Georgia and I, of course, are doing other things too. If we could plan ahead better, which we both are not that good at, unfortunately, it would be
What?
great. Yeah, well, it just happens so because you can't suddenly get a guest on board. But if you know of anybody, let us know, and maybe it'll help our planning too. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. We're happy to reach out, even if you haven't met them personally. You're just like, I saw this person interviewed on Nova, and they seemed really interesting. We're like, okay, well, we'll try to get that person. We'll try to make an episode on that topic. If not that person, we'll try to find someone else maybe who knows something about it. But yeah, we really appreciate all of your input and feedback. It makes the show like exciting for us.
Which
So
which reminds me,
yeah.
Amanda recently communicated with me, and she came up with some ideas of well, at least one guest that we'll bring on the show. So that's good. Thank you for that. So
Oh, nice.
that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll see you
All right,
next
bye
week.
everyone.
We'll see you
Yeah, we'll
next
see you
week.
next week at the same time to talk about species